Welcome back to Aaradhna. In this week's interview, Mr. Anand Atal is talking to Mr. Micheal Cremo. Through decades of research, analyzing scientific data, as well as analyzing Vedic Hindu literature, Mr. Cremo has come to a new interpretation of the controversial topic of human evolution. Here's this week's interview.
Mr. Cremo, I'd like to welcome you to Aaradhna, and I'd like to thank you for taking trouble from coming from a long distance to come for this interview and come to Vancouver for that.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here and with your viewers.
I have gone through your book, The Human Devolution, and I haven't seen your previous one, but I have been very impressed with the amount of research you have put into it in trying to uncover what is behind the origin of man and what is behind humanity actually. I'm quite concurring with you that occasionally scientists become very comfortable with the existing paradigm. They don't wish to invert, nobody wants to rattle the apple cart. And maybe the theory of human evolution is like that. So as kids like to say, we come from apes, this is accepted as a wisdom. Now, can we go over a little bit of, because our viewers, we come from all ages and all sections of society. So can I have a little bit of discussion of where this notion of humans coming from apes come from?
Well, it comes from 19th century scientists such as Charles Darwin, who proposed the modern theory of evolution by natural selection. They proposed that human beings must have come from some more primitive ape-like creature. And they say today that the first apes and monkeys came into existence about 40 million years ago. They say the first ape men, the first hominids, came into existence about 6 million years ago. And finally, they say that humans like us came into existence between 100 and 150,000 years ago. And generally, they say that all of the fossil evidence supports that evolutionary picture of human origins, but
This is generally speaking.
Yes.
But there are some very specific omissions in that. So let's come to geological records. Geological record, could you just take a moment to explain what is it which was used to establish the accuracy of the theory of evolution?
Well, the first thing that geologists came to was that the Earth's history was very long. Previous to the 19th century, many geologists and scientists believed that the history of the Earth could be compressed within 10,000 years or so. And they had that idea under the influence of a certain interpretation
theology,
of the Bible. Yes.
Christian theology.
Yes. But then later, geologists began paying careful attention to the rates of sedimentation, and they could see by these gradual processes, it must have taken the strata, the thousands and thousands of feet of layers of rock and sediment that we observe on Earth. It would have taken a long time for those strata to have accumulated. Later, in the 20th century, they began applying radiometric methods to these strata, and they've come up with an age.
To work out the age of these rocks.
Yes, to work out the age for the rocks. And basically, they've come to the conclusion that the Earth itself is about 6 billion years old, that the very first signs of life on Earth go back to between 2 and 3 billion years, but they believe that those very first signs of life are only very primitive one-celled creatures. They would believe that life on the surface of the Earth began about 500 or 600 million years.
600 plus, you can say.
Yeah.
You get to pre-Cambrian times.
Yes.
And almost, yes.
But when we get, that would have been life within the ocean. Now, when we're speaking about more advanced forms of life, plant life and animal life, coming into existence on the land, that would take us back.
Which
maybe.
will leave some evidence behind
Yeah.
in the form of fossils. Yeah.
So that's their outline. But what I found when I did, 8 years of research into the whole, history of geology and paleontology and archaeology, that there are many discoveries that aren't mentioned in our textbooks. In particular, I've been concentrating on evidence for human antiquity. And what I found, surprisingly enough, is that if we actually look at everything archaeologists and geologists and paleontologists have found, we would see that there are discoveries of human bones, human artifacts, and human footprints that go back many, many millions of years, tens of millions of years, even hundreds of millions of years. And of course, this evidence, this body of evidence, contradicts what we're now being told
So
about.
anything which didn't fit in this pre-existing idea that humans are that old and they evolved, they are just like all other animals, they have evolved from the evolutionary within the sequence, they probably threw away anything which didn't neatly fit in the whole picture.
Yes, that appears to be what happened. There appears to be a process of knowledge filtration that operates.
You have
within
used
the
that term.
scientific
I was
world.
going to
Yeah.
come to you to give me some examples, but very simple example is for about 1500 years, Aristotle's ideas, they prevailed. Nobody believed that when you drop a heavier object and a lighter object, they will hit the earth at the same time. They continued to believe that earth was at the center of the universe. So obviously other ideas were there in the East and they were not included. And so let's come to knowledge filtration. I'm quite impressed with the evidence you have displayed in there. What is it?
Well, knowledge filtration involves the idea that at any particular time, scientists have a certain consensus about a particular idea. For example, about human origins. Today, the consensus is that human beings like us evolved from more primitive ape-like creatures, and that humans like us have come into existence fairly recently, within the past 100,000 years. So reports of evidence that conform to that consensus will pass through this social and intellectual filter quite easily, which means students will read about this evidence in their textbooks, people will hear scientists speaking about it on television, and if they go to the local Museum of Natural History, they'll see the objects. But if we have reports of evidence that radically contradict this current consensus, then you don't read about this evidence in the textbooks, you don't hear scientists speaking very much about it, and if you go to the local museum, you won't see the artifacts on display.
The same thing happened with the plate tectonics theory.
Yes,
As you are
absolutely.
aware, before it came in, before the massive evidence came from Alfred Wegener, they completely rejected the idea of the plates. So
Well, actually, Wegener died before he died. He was the German scientist who first proposed the idea of plate tectonics, and it wasn't until perhaps 30 years after he died that his colleagues in the field of geology finally accepted what he
and
proposed.
how true when he said that the secret of my ideas will be found on the ocean floor, and sure enough, during the World War, a few people like Hess and some other oceanographers, they did find that there was evidence for plates moving. So is there any other glaring example of modern knowledge filtration you can give?
Well, I think it's present in many areas. For example, the chemical origin of life is another popular theory, but actually there's no real evidence to support it at this time. Nobody can tell us which chemicals combine together and which way to form exactly which first living thing. But I've more or less concentrated in my own research on how this knowledge filtering process operates with the evidence for human origins and antiquity. And there are so many cases where professional scientists, including geologists, have discovered evidence for extreme human antiquity, and they've suffered for it. For example, some American archaeologists at a place called Hueyatlaco in Mexico found human artifacts They brought in a team of geologists from the United States Geological Survey, including one that I personally know, Virginia Steen McIntyre. The geologists used 4 methods to date the site. They used the uranium series method, they used the zircon fission track method, they used the tetrahydration method, they used standard stratigraphic analysis. Using all 4 methods, they came up with an age of 250,000 years for the site. But the archaeologists refused to accept it. They said, that's impossible. Human beings capable of making these artifacts did not exist 250,000 years ago. So they refused to publish the age for the site.
There comes the knowledge filtration. It doesn't fit in, so let's not use it.
Yeah, so there are many examples like
So now you raised a question. If we didn't come from apes, where did we come from?
Well, I think before we even ask that question, where did we come from, we should first of all ask the question, what is a human being? We should know what it is.
Very
we're trying to
definitely. No,
explain.
I think I will explore it, maybe
Yes.
in a second interview.
Yes.
But still, you have to give us some idea where this
I'll give you
arise in your mind. This,
Yes, I'll give you a
This
hint.
particular one, yes.
I'll give you a hint. I would say that we did not evolve up from matter, as most scientists now tell us. Rather, we have devolved or come down from a level of pure consciousness or spirit.
And how did you make that conceptual jump from the existing paradigm into this one?
Well, many years ago, I became interested in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India and the spiritual practices that come from India. When I was in my 20s, I became initiated by one of the gurus from India, Bhaktivedanta Swami, who was the founder of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And through his influence, I became very, very interested in especially the Puranas, the histories written in the ancient Sanskrit language. And these histories tell us that humans have been on this planet since the very beginning of the history of life on Earth, and they also explain the spiritual origins of the human species and all other species as well. So without having come in contact with this sophisticated, very extensive body of knowledge, I would have had no reason to question what I always learned, from my teachers in school and from my professors at the university. I wouldn't have had any reason to question.
You would have been one of them.
Yes, I would have accepted, as I did before I encountered these writings, what I'd been told. So when I saw this very well developed, philosophically sophisticated presentation of an alternative, I was impressed by it. Then I began to go back to the world of science and look for the evidence that might support that point of view. And when I didn't find it in the textbooks and the current scientific literature, I dug deeper. I began to look into the whole history of many fields of science in the West, including archaeology, anthropology, geology, and paleontology. And when I looked deeper, that's when I encountered this process of knowledge filtration. I discovered actually there are facts which support the worldview that we see in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. The facts are there. They simply have been filtered out of the normal discussion in these fields of science.
So your orientation within your spiritual and religious framework made you aware of something different to explain the existing phenomena.
Yes.
And you decided to use the scientific method to prove the very theories which scientists use to reject this kind of extra wisdom.
Yes. Of course, I think proof is maybe too strong a word. Very few things can be rigorously proved in science, but you can pile up enough evidence to convince people that it's very likely that this was the case. I think proof is something that you find in
if you
formal
put it in a
logic.
scientific context,
Yes.
that proof has to be, but a lot of things cannot be proven.
Yes.
Nonetheless,
They can be demonstrated.
they are existing in the minds of the people.
Yes.
And I think experience-based reality, we might be very open enough to say in this program, experience-based reality is very difficult to subject to scientific way of doing it. So scientific phenomena probably don't cover the whole range of phenomena we observe.
It depends upon how we define science, however. Some people wish to define science in a very narrow way as a game that's played by a particular set of rules, namely that you don't bring in any type of designer or controller, you don't bring in any type of elements other than the strictly material elements, you don't bring in any discoveries that radically contradict accepted ideas. But if you're going to play by those rules, then you have to admit, well, maybe you're not dealing with everything that is true. And if we want to deal with everything that is true, we may have to change the rules a little bit.
That's right. You know, the field becomes very narrow. Scientist world is very, very narrow in a way, because a lot of phenomena are just not under scientific scrutiny.
Under the terms that they now want to apply, under the methods that they now want to apply and the rules that they want to apply. But what I tell people is I don't consider myself to be either a scientist or a religionist. I consider myself to be a human being who is trying to understand what's true. And whatever will help me understand what is true about life in this universe, whether you call it science or religion or whatever else, if it's contributing to the truth, I want to know about it.
It's a very rational approach. And Mr. Cremo, I thank you for coming for this interview. But in our next interview, we will talk about your book, Human Devolution, and see how you have come up with this idea of the origin of man. Thank you.